back in Brothers from Inglewood podcast once again, coming to you live and direct. We got a special guest in the house, and it's just a blessing to have him here. And I'm gonna allow him to introduce himself in a few minutes. But I want to say thanks to the Coalesce Group for allowing us to partner with you, and we appreciate everything that you're doing in the educational community and things that you have installed for youth of America. Thanks to Fruit Off the Vine Clothing Apparel for allowing us to attach ourselves to your brand. Thank you so much for the women and the young girls who you are dressing and appealing to on a day-to-day basis. Thank you so much. And once again, we're back. My brother is not here in the studio today. He'll join us at a later time, but I want to say what's up to Charley Mack, co-host. It is just a blessing to have a dear friend of mine in the studio who's going to share his interview with us, and we're going to talk about some great things. We really don't have a specific topic we're going to platform from. We're just going to, we're going to open it up, and we're going to have a great discussion. But I believe that you're going to be really informed and encouraged by our guest today, and he's going to share some information that will enlighten you. Welcome, Frank. Introduce yourself to the people, and we're going to go from there, bro.
All right, hello, I'm Frank Elliott Boyd III. I'm 56 years old. That's a blessing to get here. All the guys, I grew up in the Crenshaw district, and a lot of the guys that I started out with are no longer here or spending time somewhere else. And so to be here is really a blessing. Like Hoopie said, we go back a long way. We share the passion of academics and athletics, basketball, football, and we also are both Steeler fans.
Yes, sir. Still current to the end.
That's right, the Steelers. So, and basically, I believe that I'm more than qualified to sit before a group of interested people to give you some insight and explain some things that I've gone through, and to help encourage and enlighten and uplift those young people who may go through some struggles and end up believing in themselves and aligning themselves with God and believing wholeheartedly that He has your back, and put your faith in Him and aligning yourself with good people and moving forward. I grew up, as I said, in the Crenshaw district. I grew up on Arlington, a real popular block, that same place where Nipsey Hussle was made real famous. But we came up with the same group of guys, and we shared there were a lot of things that interest in sports, and sometimes some of the things we won't talk about that were not so great, but but we were a brotherhood, a family, and stuff like that, and we protected each other. We protected those in our community, and we wanted to see some people get out. We all had O.J. Simpson, Jim Brown, and celebrities that we admired, and we wanted to put our names on the back of our jerseys. And if we didn't make it ourselves, we wanted to ensure or give our offsprings a chance to do that. Went to 59th Street Elementary School. All the guys that came out of there, and I had some behavior problems. A lot of trouble accepting authority. At home, it was real strict. My mom and my dad were very strict. My dad was a Marine. My mom was a school teacher. So when I got a chance to get out the house, I wanted to unleash a little bit and act up at school, give them get an audience, being a class clown, and I paid for it dearly when I went home. Went to Audubon Middle School, and actually was junior high school at that time. And then they kind of opportunity transfer. They moved me over to Horseman. And then I ended up going to Crenshaw High School, and had some problems over there. Ended up going to Hamilton High School when I graduated there. I offered some opportunities to go play Division II basketball, but as we all do, I thought that I was a superstar, and because of my work ethic and my love and passion for the sport, and so I went to a community college, West LA Community College, and tried to give myself a second chance to go to the Division I, but it didn't happen. It just didn't happen. I believe that I was very competitive and enough, but I started to have chronic tendonitis in both knees and an Achilles tendon. So I went over to Azusa Pacific and worked out there. Then I went over to Cal State LA with Coach Newman. So it just, I was play on Monday and couldn't walk until the next Monday. So it was time for me to give it up. I had a neighbor. I had moved to the city of Hawthorne, and I had a neighbor who every time I would see him pull up, as a kid, I always wanted to be a cop.
Okay.
Or in some type of service capacity and help and uplift and protect the community because of some things that I had gone through as a child. My sister was victimized at age 5 and I was 4, and we were kidnapped, and unfortunately for the grace of God, we were allowed to make it out alive. And that's what started my passion for martial arts. I joined the BKF, the Black Karate Federation, at age 7, and then eventually we changed to the BKKA, and I've been involved in teaching and that stuff. Earned a black belt at age 16, and joined with that stuff a long time. So, but anyway, back to West LA Community College. I played over there for 2 years and didn't work out at Azusa, didn't work out at Cal State LA. Once again, back to that neighbor who was working as a deputy probation officer.
Okay.
And he told me that if I were going to give up sports, this was an opportunity to give back to the community. So I went over to the probation department, 9150 East Imperial, and applied for a job there. And I worked, about 10 years as a detention service officer in Central Eastlake Juvenile Hall. I worked over at LP, worked over at Sylmar, was eventually promoted, went to Camp Challenger in Lancaster.
Are these young adolescents, or are they men?
No.
What is that juvenile system age bracket?
Well, when I first started out, it went up to age 25.
So
when
grown men.
So actually, what happens is that if you commit a crime as a juvenile, the juvenile still has jurisdiction over those individuals who commit a crime under the age of 18 because of up to 25 years old. So when we first started, I was 26, and there were guys in there who were 23, 24, and I was responsible for the caretaking, safety, and security of those individuals.
Wow.
So there was no, how we had old teachers when we were younger. No, I was responsible to control and de-escalate and house and feed guys that were 23, 24 years old. Wow. So they were real close in age. And
so they never moved these guys to YA? That's youth authority?
Youth authority. What happens is that when probation is a disposition. Juvenile hall is a detaining facility. So when a person is arrested, they go to juvenile hall. And once they go through the court proceedings, then they determine if they're going to go to camp, youth authority, depending on the severity of their crime. Then they were placed accordingly. So you would go you can either go home on probation, you can go to probation camp, you can go to placement, or you can go to youth authority, which these are more sophisticated guys. But juvenile hall was chaotic. It was wild because everybody had to come through the halls. They had been coached by their OGs, and they looked at us. Probation started off. It was all white, and you had to have a degree, and to get into probation at that time. But guess what? There were low numbers of blacks and browns. So what they did, they deprofessionalized the DSO position, detention service officer position, and required you to only have 60 units. So then we started to get a lot of people from the inner city who could actually deal and relate to the population.
Because a lot of my buddies got involved. Kirkland Howland.
Oh, yes.
You know,
he was a baller.
Yeah. I played against Kurt in high school. And, so it was a few guys that I knew. One of my teammates from high school, Brian Harris, he also, I think he worked in Sylmar.
Oh, yeah, I know Brian Harris.
And then, Derek Dotson, who was also my teammate in high school. He's still with probation right now. But we did know a few guys. And then my stepfather, Donald Petway, he passed away some years ago in 2009. But that was my stepfather. So rest in peace. he was in probation, and then he went on to be, I think, there's another division, right? You got probation, then you have
Parole.
Yeah. Then he went into parole.
Yeah.
But yeah, we did know, like you said. I mean, there were more relational guys that got into the profession. Once I guess they opened it up and made it a fair, opportunity for people to apply. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to interject that because you grow up with guys and you see them go through this system. You don't know how it works because you're not the guy that's in trouble. Mm-hmm. And you kind of get bits and pieces from the stories once they hit the streets again. But, I mean, there's so many things that we don't know that are, like they say, for those that are in the free world, we don't really know what that consists of. But go ahead, continue with that.
My desire to be a role model and to set an example, because I mean, as you know, I grew up in the wars between the '60s and the 8 trays, and it was black on black crime, and we were hating each other, and the only immediate examples that we have for success were guys that were selling drugs, cocaine.
Now, did you guys go to school together?
Yeah, we went to Horseman together.
Okay. You shared the middle school.
Yeah, we would
because you was on different sides of Florence, right? Mm-hmm. One was on the other side. Okay, all right.
And we were all buddies until something happened at one of the concerts. Egyptian Lover, Uncle Jam's Army had a concert on a Friday night, and we had all gone, and when we went to the concert, there was some horseplay, real intense horseplay that carried over back to school on that Monday at Horseman, and then one person from the 60s and then one person from the 8 trays that got into a fight, and then it just spilled over until after school, and then some of because they were our homeboys, our friends, and then some of our older guys that went over there and they ended up shooting, and that's what started the war between
somebody got killed.
Somebody, Cowboy was the first person got killed going over there. So that's what basically started that.
Wasn't he someone's brother that was a notable older guy?
Well, he was an OG.
He had an older, yeah.
There were possibly, I didn't know that much about, because I was a 7th grader at that time. Right. But I just know that he had gotten killed. He had gone over there and went to go hang out and pal around with those guys. Yeah. And then he had ended up getting killed. And then they told us, "Hey man, you guys got to be careful." And then we went through that real intense thing where they was coming over shooting up guys in our neighborhood and vice versa. So it was pretty rough.
Black on black crime.
Yeah, black on black crime that was real intense. So being in juvenile hall, I really wanted to. I remember Guess jeans, and when I first started,
Beat Out Sassoon,
and Jordache and all this. But we could wear our own clothes to probation at that time. And so basically, these kids could see that, man, they could relate to people that they could relate to. If you were in a suit, they was kind of intimidated by that, or they figured that you didn't walk in their moccasins, so they basically didn't trust you. So I was able to establish a great rapport with the youth in there, and basically de-escalate and defuse a lot of situations. There were guys who were coming in there for killing somebody's family members, and we had to deal with that. I mean, they were right. Juvenile hall was very, very explosive, and if you, like you said, you had to be in there, man. I mean, for the first year, Cameron, I actually went home with a headache every day. I mean, it was that bad. It was fights, and you had to learn. And when they let us in, I started 5/30/89, and when they let us in, they had been on a freeze for 5 years. So what happened is that we basically took away from the overtime that all those old heads was getting. So they didn't like us. So there was a population board. It was a clipboard with all the names of the inmates. They would tell you your count, how many people you have in the unit, and walk off. It wouldn't tell you anything. And the kids were very manipulative, and they knew when you were new. They called us new booties. So I mean, a kid would get up and say, and because we, in living in mainstream, in the mainstream or being in the free world, there are a lot of practices or a lot of things that you go through that you don't know that when you go in there. So if somebody told you had to use the bathroom, you thought that it doesn't go. Man, they jumping up to go fight other people. They had all kind of tricks, and then they got off into that dissing stuff. They had certain words that would be offensive.
Explosive.
to another person's game.
Power word.
I didn't know that stuff. You know, like a cereal brand, certain things that, you know, how you diss somebody's neighborhood. So there were. I mean, I went home and I think on the average we had about 10 or 15 fights per shift. We had to write paperwork,
separate them, put them in
lock them up.
What they call it, put them in the box.
Yeah,
right?
put them in the box, man.
Yeah.
At that time, we were allowed a kid in 24 hours. If he didn't calm down, de-escalation period, we would put him in the box for 24 hours, and then the supervisor would come over and extend them for another 24 hours, and so they could be held up to 72 hours. Now you can only put a kid in the box for 1 hour and put them right back in together. That environment is still real hostile.
Wow.
So, yeah, man. So basically that was my purpose of going in there. We had a lot of guys that were very athletic, and I later learned that what I looked at, if a person was in juvenile hall, he was bad.
Okay. Yeah, but you know what? I just kind of want to interject this because it's funny that you say that. Kirkland Howland, was working, I guess, Sylmar? No, downtown.
He was central. He was
central. Okay, yeah. That's downtown, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Okay, one of my point guards, this guy was like on his way. This guy was like really, really good, on his way, scholarship offers. He was young, 10th grade. So he got in trouble. He went to juvenile hall. He met Kirkland Howland. And Kirk, I saw him shortly afterwards, and he said, man, that was a good dude, man. He didn't belong in here. And he really didn't, because he didn't have any priors, but he was he was at the scene where an older woman had her purse snatched. He was there. They caught the 3 guys. He said that he did it because, he didn't have any priors. He was only 16, 15, and he felt like they told him, man, you ain't going to get any time or nothing. It's going to be a slap on the wrist. Man, Judge Dorn made an example out of him and sent him to jail for 6 months. That 6 months turned into a year and a half, almost, a little over a year. And so he lost his entire junior year as a player. He was supposed to go to Nike camp or whatever. But I say that to say that you guys know the quality of an individual just by being around them for a few weeks, few days, or whatever. Because some guys, that's sort of their makeup. Whereas other guys, you can tell they're just like green thumbs.
Just not them. Their character is truly defined, and that's one of the things you know that guys that'll come in there and they're the guys that have been coached to be hardcore. Everybody wants to, because you're in a situation and you're surrounded by a lot of other testosterone. Everybody wants to be the tough guy. Yeah. Everybody wants to play tough, but then you find out. Your true character gets revealed, because on the street you may be able to talk madness to somebody and you'll never see that person again, or you'll have some help. In juvenile hall, you're going to one-on-one, and at some point
you got to prove it.
The Thunderdome is open, and they're going to let you get in. So and then you got guys that, man, I got hands, and then they get beaten up real bad, and my thing was, man, what happened? A lot of guys that got up in there, and there were a lot of talented athletes. We had football teams, basketball teams, like you said. But as being a product of the system, what I later found out as I got years and experience in the probation department and in law enforcement in itself, that we as minorities are at a disadvantage, because the plea bargains that people they give you a balloon sentence of, I'll give you 50 years, but if you take this plea and we'll reduce it down to 7 years, and then people tell, hey man, because if you lose, and
this is what's going to happen.
This was going to happen, and people, some people, no, people don't. Only 2% of cases, 90% of the cases are plea bargain. 90%.
So would you say it's systemic?
Oh yes, most definitely. It's definitely
and
systemic.
Is it racially biased?
Yes, most definitely racially biased, because they know that we can't afford the attorneys. In most cases, we are put behind the 8 ball, less fortunate financially.
Single parents.
Yeah, single parents.
Sometimes we're not even in the home.
Yeah, not even in the home.
As juveniles.
Yeah.
We're somewhere, we ran away, or we just not in a good situation.
Yeah, and that's what happened. So once again, systemic racism weighs heavily. So because a quality attorney can make some negotiations, and we don't. I grew up when I eventually moved to the suburbs. I found out that people have an attorney on retainer. But we didn't. That wasn't something that we talked about.
No.
Our conversations in the community weren't about our return.
No, it's like don't get in trouble.
Don't get in trouble.
Yeah.
And then most parents, because of that, we believe that we were taught to be well behaved. Those individuals who were incarcerated or who were associated with the system were bad apples.
Yeah.
And when I found out, after working in there, I found out that a lot of kids, and I started to interview kids, they were victims. They were victims of systemic racism in the sense that, well, my parents told me that either I'm going to do 25 years, so they offered me 2 years, and I better take that 2 years because if I lose, and they start throwing statistics at you that let you know that most kids who don't take the deal end up.
That happened to me. Now, granted, I shouldn't have been where I was at. Mm-hmm. My older brother, Charles, told me, don't go with these guys. You guys going to end up going to the county. Mm-hmm. I was a senior in high school, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I'm just going to ride. I mean, I'm not going, I don't have any intent to do anything. Anyway, to make the long story short, we end up in Manhattan Beach, a classmate of mine, and we're rolling through, and knowingly at this point, the guy was, pretty much scouting. Right, I'll just say the guy was scouting. We end up getting out of the car, going through alleys. Police, pop up. No lights on. Just cars out everywhere. I ended up getting arrested that night. The officer that arrested me, you could tell these guys were just like really racially motivated to seal the deal. And so this sergeant came to me. He's like, hey, I'll take this one. So I didn't even know the sergeant knew who I was. He was a Caucasian police officer. Obviously, he knew who I was just from a physical, he knew who I was, right? Mm-hmm. I was an athlete at Morningside High at the time, both sports, football and basketball. So I was a standout in a sense. Anyway, he puts me in the car. Before he puts me in the car, he's like, he was like, he said, you go to Morningside now? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, you the quarterback? And I was like, yeah. He's like, you the point guard too? And I'm like, what is this about, right? Mm-hmm. He said, Coach Franklin is going to be very disappointed. So he put me in the car, he took me down, and the bottom line is, he knew who I was, so he knew pretty much what my character seemed to be. Even though he wasn't around me all the time, he was a referee, man. He was a CIF referee, and that's how he knew, some things about me or whatever. And he's the guy that prevented. I was 18 at the time. I was a senior. Mm-hmm. The guy I was with was 17. So he got released that night. I had to stay for 3 days in Manhattan Beach Police Department in the holding tank, right? But he's the one, I believe that sergeant is the one that said, don't take him to the county jail. Because, the bus usually comes the next morning to get all these guys that are in the substations, mm-hmm. right? I went to Torrance Court from that Manhattan Beach mm-hmm. jail cell. And I believe that this guy was the reason. And I ate well. It seemed well. Because I had these nice submarine sandwiches with, it didn't seem like it was like, from the cafeteria. It seemed like they ordered it in. But I believe that by the grace of God, that this was the beginning of my processing chamber. I say that to say this. I had a public defender when I went to Torrance Court, had no idea that I was going to be released on OR. But that lady convinced me to plea out, to plead no contest to all these charges. And I didn't do anything, man. I didn't do anything. I didn't have any equipment on me to break into anything. But whatever was found, or kind of put together, it was to basically get a conviction. And I was a product, man. I almost lost my scholarship. I was on probation. I didn't have to appear, but I was on probation. And before I could go to school in September, this happened in May. I had to be in school in Utah in September. Mm-hmm. Man, I had to complete 400 hours of community service before I could go. Mm-hmm. My scholarship was hanging in the balance, man. Mm-hmm. The school didn't even know that I was in trouble. Mm-hmm. And man, I hadn't had no record. So it has to be racially biased and systemically induced when you're dealing with male black youth.
Most definitely, and I mean, after I had my experiences, Hoopie, and I'll go into that later on, I found out that I was actually convinced that racism was a lie, that it no longer existed. I knew about Lyndon B. Johnson, and I didn't, as far as, affirmative action having to be an executive order as opposed to people actually feeling like that. So because we were taught that racism, that those were false claims, that we were making allegations of racism, and every time you would say something to a white, we felt that it was racism, and when we allege it, they would say, oh man, you guys are always bringing up that stuff. And because people kind of kept it suppressed because they knew that it was wrong, we didn't pay attention to it as much. The most recent thing with the George Floyd and all the other things really took us back, and it was actually with President Trump being in office. It just really brought it out. Racism was being hidden. It was covert. It was. I think I never knew how much systemic racism had influenced law enforcement, and I would say that is because when I started working there were practices that as an officer that I was forced to adopt, like those cops that stood by and watched George Floyd get murdered. You don't buck the system. Yeah. There was a white probation officer who had called a black kid a nigger. And when he said that, I was offended by it.
Of course.
And so when they asked me to write my report, I wrote my report. Well, guess what? The next day when I went to work in another unit, the black guys had come to me and said, hey, man, we don't tell on each other like that. Basically, there's a code of silence that we have here, and that we protect
each other.
We protect each other.
The brothers came to you like that?
The brothers told me that because brothers did. If you a person that would write that, then guess what? You would tell on anybody. And so I learned, and I got conditioned into that, Hoopie. I never did.
So it wasn't about moral and ethics, it was about a brotherhood.
You had that it was us against them. It was us against them. The inmates, whether they're juveniles or what, that we don't see color. It's
against
badge.
them.
It's the badge against those who were being governed.
Wow.
Bottom line, and that's just how it was. And so there were, from showers to distributions of laundry to food to everything that was being practiced in there. I didn't look at it for as inhumane as it was until my family, my little brother, came to juvenile hall. And when I saw that my little brother was suffering from from the system, I'll give you an example that we would be responsible to get laundry. So we would send what's called messengers, or those are porters in prison, and then we would send them to get laundry. And we would not really get clean laundry, and we was passing them out. And there were a lot of practices, brother, that wasn't cool. That I'm not going to be a whistleblower and sit up here and tell. It was unethical all the way, and we were forced to do that because either you do what they asked you to do as a newcomer, or you don't pass probation. So
they were hanging some things over your head to condition you to adapt to how it is. This is in other words, they had a way of helping you conform to policy.
Most definitely. You want your job, or
Right.
do you want to be condemned by everybody that you work with? Nobody wants to be in that environment, wants to be labeled as the whistleblower, labeled as a snitch, labeled as the person that'll tell on other people. So guess what? You do, and then coupled with the fact that you believe that those individuals that you're responsible to supervise, even because they've been accused of committing such heinous crimes, you have that us against them mentality, and it just keeps getting embedded into your psyche over and over and over and over. So guess how you start to treat those individuals? Well, back to when my little brother came in, and he would tell my mom that, hey, they was doing this, and I'm like, hey, so I would get on the phone and call them, hey man, y'all can't do my little brother like that. Right. Meaning that we were supposed to give.
It was now it's touching home, because you seeing your own flesh and blood become a victim to this.
But you don't look at it like that when you're. So even though I had some guys that had come through from the neighborhood, I didn't personalize it the same way when it's your mom that's laying in that casket, or your mom. It's a whole
different element.
Whole different ball game.
Let me say this before we end this segment and go to the next. Let me ask you this. Because you transitioned to probation as a professional, and you mentioned what it was like growing up off of Arlington and in that culture. I presume that you were exposed to gang violence, and you had to develop within this community. So, being that you knew the environment, you were conditioned to survive. What kept you from joining a gang, as opposed to, because we were all affiliated. None of us that grew up in the hood can say that we weren't affiliated with gangs, because we were. Whether you were put on or not, you represented that community by which you lived in, period. Because the gangsters spoke to you, they ate with you, you went to the same liquor store they went to, so they knew who you were. You weren't an implant. You were all right because you were in that community, right? Now, we also know the dynamic of this, and then I'll let you answer that question, as opposed to how did you avoid from becoming a member of a gang. We have relatives, bro, that are from different hoods and different communities, but these are your DNA family members representing another color or another set. What is that dynamic like, man? Now that you in probation, you're a professional, you upholding the law, but you got all this credibility. Man, you got street credibility.
Yeah, that was tough, man, because I grew up on a block where there were 26 of us boys, and eventually all of us were affiliated and associated with the Rolling 60s.
There you go.
And we lost homeboys that to other gang communities that made us represent that. Like you said, I represented the 6-0s to the fullest because that's where I was from.
Exactly. It became personal because these were your friends.
Yes,
Go ahead.
And what I wanted when I never did back away from that. I always, even when I went to the halls, there were guys that would come in that were from 60s that would say, hey man, that's my big homeboy. And I never did say that I wasn't your homeboy, but like I told them that like Malcolm would say, or Dr. King would say, that a man at 26 should act differently than a man at 16. And I'm out there, wearing a blue khaki suit and have a blue rag in my pocket, walking around Crenshaw and stuff like that. But then when I saw how fragile life was, and I saw some of my homeboys getting killed, and I became a father at 26, and I wanted to be there for my son. Gotcha. So it wasn't that I denounced my neighborhood at all. It was just that I understood how fragile life was, and I didn't want to be one of those guys, the next guy that dudes are pouring out a little liquor for.
I got you.
Life was much more important to me.
You grew up.
I grew up.
Mature.
And I wanted to set an example for those other guys. but that being affiliated and associated and knowing the gang culture allowed the kids to know, hey man, he's one of us. So now they like my stilo, they like the way I carry myself. So they say, hey man, there is a chance for me to grow up from that. And people need to understand that there's an infantry, and then there's administration, and then there's a higher level. Okay. I'm still of the Crenshaw community. My heart is still there, but some of the guys don't share the same values. Okay. And if you're out, my thing is that I believe I'm a black advocate. I believe in black unity.
There you go.
And so if we're committing black on black crime, then that's not consistent with my beliefs. So I can't identify with somebody who's out there trying, because the way I look at it, that all of us who consider ourselves double OGs, triple OGs, we should be trying to uplift and build the community up and change it, and to get off into what being a blood was about and being what a Crip was about when it originally started off, which was black unity, protecting the community.
Yes, so it was.
And these guys, this generation has changed, and nobody wants to be. We have too many Indians and not enough chiefs. Yeah. So now you have everybody serving a personal agenda as opposed to saying, let's protect Arlington. I don't think, and I don't know, I didn't grow up on every block, but the closeness and the bond that we had on Arlington, I mean, you couldn't mess with one. And nobody on that block, and everybody on that block was a family, and we basically we that's how it was. So we protected everybody on that block. We were a family, and then when somebody off of our block, the first kid got killed off of our block, we found out that that it's not only inter, it's intra.
So these are the 1970s, early 80s.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, because I remember the era. I remember when gang banging went from neighborhood, brotherhood, fighting, pop locking against each other, competitive sports against each other. It went from fist fighting to using knives to eventually gunplay. Mm-hmm. It progressed. And I think it progressed because, number one, it should have never even been. But I think it progressed because some of the older guys started going to prison, started going to jail. So the system started to kind of bend a little bit, because now the younger guys that are out there saying, well, we should do it this way, we should do it that way. So I think the pecking order began to soften and loosen up, because some of them OG guys was going to jail for a long time, and they were really removed from the streets. So a lot of the things wasn't as organized like we know of some of the other organizations that have the organization. But we as urban Americans, we didn't really have that infrastructure to where some of those things should have never been. Hurting people's family, doing drive-bys with people that have nothing to do with nothing, and you shooting into a crowd. So I say all that to say that the dynamic that we saw then trickled down into a system that was eventually revealed through government and societal that really didn't help us as urban American people.
Not at all.
And so I want to end this segment before we go into the next, because there's some other questions that I'm going to raise that I believe that people will be really moved by to see, your transition and how things, really has developed for you now. So I want to say thank you for tuning in to this episode. We here with Frank Boyd, a dear friend of mine, very passionate leader. I consider him a leader because he's a man of God. He is a professional, and he's done some things to give back, not only to his own children, but to the community that he represents. And you're going to be very, very excited to hear the next segment when we continue. Thanks, Coalesce Group, once again, for everything that you have done. We appreciate you, Fruit Off the Vine, and look forward to strengthening our relationship in days to come. So until we start again, God bless you. See you soon. Peace.
Peace.